thank you for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Holmes, Dean of the School of Economic, Political, and Policy Sciences. And we have a very special alum with us today, Dan Healy. Dan was a student of mine way back in the beginning. He's got a degree from us in government and politics, and he's now a local entrepreneur doing a lot of good work in Dallas. So Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks for having me today. I'm very proud to be here to do this with you. I am a 2000 graduate of UT Dallas with, as you mentioned, a degree in government and politics. I've had a kind of unplanned roller coaster ride that led me to become ultimately an entrepreneur and found my own company in the real estate investment space, Civitas Capital Group, where I'm chief executive today.
So now I remember, so just a little history for people watching. So I started working at UT Dallas in 1998, and Dan, Dan was one of there was a really fun, dynamic group of majors then. We had a lot of fun. I've made really close relationships with a lot of people from those years. But you didn't want to go to business right away. You were going to go to law school. And in fact, you went to law school.
That's right. That's correct. Both of my parents are lawyers. I, came up with my father in particular, really encouraging me to consider it. I wanted to go to law school and then become maybe a federal prosecutor or some sort of regulatory role. And I really put all of my time and effort into getting to that. I did very well at UTD. I got into most of the top 10 law schools that I applied to, and ultimately chose to go to the University of Chicago, in part because it's your alma mater. But it wasn't until I got to Chicago that I actually had some conversations with the practitioners who were working in large law firms that were doing litigation, which is what I thought I was going to need to start out doing because, frankly, I was taking on quite a bit of debt. And I realized sort of shockingly that I really had no interest in living their lives at all. The corporate practice of selling my time in 6-minute increments just wasn't, I just really had not thought about it. And so I actually dropped out of law school after one trimester at Chicago. I came back home for Christmas and just announced that I wasn't going back, and my then serious girlfriend, now wife, drove me back to Chicago in a two-door Honda to clean out my graduate dorm room, and that was the end of
that. I remember that, and I remember thinking, why would you leave, right? I mean, it was a great opportunity. I think if I remember, you had a scholarship as well, or at least a partial scholarship, but then you pivoted, and then you decided to go get your MBA. I can't remember, was there a big period of time, or was it just a few months?
No, it was really just the following fall. I applied to do that to SMU's MBA program, primarily because I really didn't know what else to do. I had not looked into any other career paths, and I knew that I was good at taking tests, and I had actually worked for my father's consulting firm all through undergrad. So I actually had several years of work experience, which was helpful in the MBA application process. Um, and I was using that as a sort of transitional tool, to meet people and learn about different opportunities and kind of figure out what to do, which is exactly the opposite of what people are told to say and write in an MBA application. But I can tell you that the three kind of areas of interest that I developed, I had fun studying, in business school, but was unable to get a job in any of those areas. So it was very useful, but nothing went according to plan. After I left law school, really nothing went
I think that's how things go for most people, right? That just life takes a turn and it's not necessarily how you think it's going to go. But so after SMU, you got your MBA, you're working now, you're an entrepreneur, you have your own company. Do you think your path, as maybe unplanned and unanticipated as it was, how's that working? Your undergraduate degree, government and politics, and now you're in business. Did you find any strengths in that path?
Yes, very much so, actually. There's several examples. One of my favorites is that my GMAT score was very high, or pretty high. It was a 740, which at the time was the 98th percentile overall. And the interesting thing, that I learned in taking the GMAT was that my GMAT has a verbal and a math component. I was in the 66th percentile in the math, 99th in the verbal, 98th overall.
Wow.
So if that gives you some indication of the quality of general MBA applicants' ability to string a sentence together, it was eye-opening to me. And I found that to be true. I found that to be true my entire career, frankly. Many of my classmates in business school, had come from business undergrad programs or other technical engineering type backgrounds I come from, which of course there's nothing wrong with. It just, over the years, my view, I certainly picked this up from my father, is that the emphasis on the written word has declined, and that left me with an unwitting competitive advantage when I entered the workforce. At the end of business school, during business school, I got married. My wife, Betsy, was pregnant with our first child and was just imminently about to give birth at the end of as I was finishing. I actually didn't walk the stage for my graduation because I was at the hospital with her, and I was unemployed, so I needed to take a job, any job. And I ended up taking a job making about 2/3 of what I had been making working for my father 3 years prior to business school. So again, the trajectory was off, but I took a job with a real estate company here in town, doing underwriting of apartment loans, mortgage loans for apartment buildings. And what that involved was, frankly, pretty simple math and writing up sales material, basically, about why a lender should make a particular loan. And it turned out I was good at that. And it turned out I was good at the deal business. That's what got me. That was the sort of the really unplanned but very fortunate outcome of picking this job. And from there, that was the last job that I applied for. From there, that was in 2002. The rest of my career has been either just being directly recruited somewhere or starting something. And I had no idea that I had any of that in me. It just kind of developed that way.
You've also, so the writing part, I mean, I think it's so critical. I mean, I think they don't really realize how valuable those communication skills are.
No, I think it is definitely undervalued. You know, in my experience now, one of the things that, you know, as I started Civitas in 2009, and so in that time we've grown and changed quite a lot, and the role that written communication plays is really critical across the board. And for, you know, those that are more familiar with, you know, how real estate private equity firms raise capital, you'll not be surprised to learn that this, you know, involves creating presentations about funds or investment strategies that need to be, you know, cogent and coherent, and also, you know, visually pleasing, easy to take in, which is not one of my skills. But beyond that, we have become better investors over time because I and others have forced our teams to articulate in writing exactly why they think something is a good idea or not, or why they think a risk is mitigated sufficiently or not. Because talking about those things in an investment committee meeting is important, you know, and debating them. But at the end of the day, there has to be a memorandum, there has to be a document that we all sign off on, that 4 years later, when there's a problem, you know, we can refer back to and understand what it is that we decided. And for that to be useful, and for us to be able to report to our investors in the interim, you know, what's actually going on in a way that they can understand, you know, requires the ability to write well. And I've found that in our company, it's a competitive advantage because it's not that common.
So tell us a little bit about Civitas and what areas are you deal making right now?
Sure. So Civitas Capital is a real estate oriented private equity firm. We invest in all areas of property types within commercial real estate, as well as including hotels. Our primary focus in the last 5 years has been multifamily apartments and hotels for the most part. We have investments in senior housing, in industrial, in office buildings, a couple of other areas. We invest as an equity investor where we'll acquire an asset outright, or in a venture with a partner sometimes. We can act as an equity provider to a developer, or we can act as a co-developer or developer ourselves. So very opportunistic, very much niche oriented. We manage now about a little more than $1 billion in assets for investors that are mostly 70+% non-US clients. So, you know, part of what makes us a little bit different is that what we call a cultural competency. We started out in 2009 focused on a federal program called EB-5, which allows a non-US national to make an investment in the United States that results in job creation for US workers to ultimately, over several years, become a permanent US resident. And what we do is create investments that facilitate that process, and we pool capital from those investors. That's how we got started. That's no longer all we do. We now manage capital for insurance companies and wealthy families and other types of more traditional investors. But that those routes serving solely Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Taiwanese, Mexican, Colombian, and other South American clients led me to create an organization that, is truly diverse. And we speak, I believe right now, we speak 12 languages internally. And it's a lot of fun. That's a big, frankly, culturally for our firm, it's a big part of why people like to work there, is we get to deal with interesting people. So we take that capital and we invest it solely here in the U.S. domestically. So our investor base is mostly international. Our investment portfolio is all.
That's fascinating. And I can see how, your political science background probably helps with that, right? I mean, that started off as a government policy, kind of this new entry point for people and diverse backgrounds. I love how you started, in a downturn as well.
Yeah, no, that was, necessity is the mother of invention is the saying, and that was very much true in my case. In 2008, I was a partner in another real estate firm that I had helped to found with a group of others, and I'd worked there about 3 years, and we were having some success in getting off the ground, but then the recession came along, and it became clear that it was going to be a serious recession, and everyone I knew in the business was getting laid off, and I thought I was going to be laid off, which, for the record, turned out to be a bad assumption. Our owners, our primary owners, a really excellent group of people out of San Antonio called SWBC, kept the entire team in place throughout the recession, and now have reaped the benefits of it. So good for them. But that was definitely atypical. Most of the firms like ours were really struggling. And that was when I learned about EB-5. I learned about it from, of all people, from my mother, actually, who has been a corporate immigration lawyer for many, many years. She represents mostly technology companies, larger companies that are moving engineers and other executive type employees from place to place around the world. And but then she happened to be representing the city of Dallas, and the city asked her to explain to them how EB-5 works and how it might be incorporated into their economic development toolbox. And so I learned that she was working on this project, and make a long story short, I had a lot of free time on my hands, frankly, because we weren't doing any business. So I got with my friend and now partner, Rafael Anchia, and we put together an unsolicited proposal to the city of Dallas to create a partnership to attract this EB-5 capital to Dallas into projects that were aligned with the city's economic development priorities. And they liked this idea. It took about a year and a half of legal work and RFP and various processes. But by the end of 2009, all of that was complete, and that's when we launched.
Wow. So how have you pivoted with COVID?
Boy, COVID, we have been fortunate in many ways. Our COVID has definitely hit our business, our portfolio. I mentioned that we invest in hotels. Those have been decimated. I mean, the whole global hotel industry has been hit very, very hard. The CARES Act and the Triple P program, Paycheck Protection Program, did benefit those investments very significantly. Created some breathing room, basically, for the recovery to at least begin to take hold. Um, it's with like many or maybe most hotel owners around the country are still definitely struggling, but we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or at least maybe there's there's been a pickup this in the last 2 or 3 weeks. There's been unfortunately a very significant rise in the number of COVID cases and hospitalizations, which of course means we're going to go in the opposite direction before we can really recover. Um, so that's been very difficult. However, we've been fortunate in that the balance of our portfolio in multifamily and other types of real estate, while it has been affected, has not been affected nearly to that extent. So compared to some of my peers and competitors, we've been very fortunate. So I have a very talented team of people that is working very hard to get these hotel investments where we want them, the investments that we already own, and at the same time play offense in the hotel space with the capital that we have available to invest, because downturns in real estate or in really in any industry are when people that have access to liquidity, access to capital, can really create huge amounts of value. So we're cautiously optimistic that on balance, our hotel business is going to be okay. But it's a fight.
Oh yeah, I mean, my favorite hotel, the Palmer House in Chicago, is in bankruptcy. It's shuttered right now. It's
Yeah.
a total anchor for South Loop. I've spent, there were some years I had 6 or 7 trips and stayed there.
Yeah.
So that's just horrible. So maybe you can find some investors to save my favorite hotel.
Oh, that hotel and any good asset like that, it will come back. It just may not be with the same owners.
Yeah.
I mean, it just depends on how much leverage and how much debt they had, and whether their lender is going to be more or less flexible, and whether they frankly have access to additional equity capital. And we're fortunate in that we own our hotels in a private equity fund that has additional liquidity. So we've been able to rework loans and do all the things that we needed to do in order to get enough time to allow the kind of market to return to something approaching normalcy. And now we're just fighting very hard to try and manage the hotels as efficiently as possible to make that happen. But to your point about about government and politics and the relevance of it, I mean, it couldn't be more relevant right now. I serve on the board of an organization called Invest in the USA, which is the nonprofit trade association that represents the EB5 industry in Washington. Through that, we're also very active with the American Hotel Lodging Association, which we also, as Civitas Capital, the firm, we have our own lobbying team in DC, and we're very, very active in attempting to influence stimulus legislation, particularly on behalf of the hotel industry, as well as restaurants and hospitality more generally, that really have taken, they've been the first hit, the hardest hit, and they'll be the last to come back. And we need help. So we're the ability to express exactly what we need to a congressional staffer who, everything they do, they make $100 billion decisions based on one-page, bullet summaries of things. That's the reality. And
Yep.
it's helpful.
Well, what advice would you give to somebody who's graduating in this environment? I mean, I know a lot of our students, they're Yeah, they're a little concerned. They don't think, I mean, the job market is an interesting one. I mean, there's still some opportunities out there. What advice would you give them?
Um, I think, looking back, the first thing I would say is keep your mind open. Uh, my my experience is that young people uh, now are much more likely to specialize very early, to study something in college or in grad school that is directly related to the job that they want to obtain when they graduate, which makes sense. I mean, that's fine. Uh, but just kind of don't forget that there are other things out there, and especially at the undergrad level, um, I would urge gaining exposure to things that you don't know anything about. You whether that's through a minor or just some electives or just getting to know people who are in different you know on different paths. It's really important because my experience, at least in as a business person who started a company, um, the most important skill that I have now has nothing to do with any academic work that I did. It's the ability to um, spot people who are better than I am at whatever the company needs. And that means not just spot good real estate people or people who really know the hotel business. There are this whole range of skills, and as I've learned this sort of the hard way, and I think most, at least many entrepreneurs learn this the hard way. Founders and entrepreneurs are often very good at starting things and not very good at running them. And when you're studying as an undergrad, um, at least I wish I had known more about the dynamics of how organizations actually work, about how companies actually work. And there's no better time to just talk to people about those things. Not just the dynamic of how the job you think you want works, like how does this organization work? How do things actually happen? Because that's, we could talk at length about the cultures of the different organizations I've worked with over the course of my career, and that mattered more by far, than any of the sort of technical skills.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, bureaucracies and cultures certainly matter.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, I worked for a company that um, that gave me an unbelievable amount of autonomy and discretion to invest money that belonged to pensioners, teachers, other you know participants in various retirement plans. And in retrospect, knowing what I know now, the level of irresponsibility there was unbelievable. You know? And but fortunately, the investments that we made there did reasonably well, and it was kind of no harm, no foul. But discovering something like that before you work there, is great. It's really helpful. If you can, if you take the time and you know what questions to ask. So it's all about people. Skills are very important. But my experience is that it's all about.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. I just love I mean, you're doing very well, but you're right. This is not where you thought you were going to be 30 years ago, 20 years ago, by any means. And I can't remember who it was. Somebody said, always take the call about an opportunity, even if you don't think you're interested, right? Somebody asks you to explore an opportunity, take it, learn about them, learn about where the field or the sector is moving. And if nothing else, it's an opportunity just to understand your competitors, right? But take
Yeah.
that peek behind those doors.
Yeah, and especially for undergraduates, I meet a lot of young, applicants that I perceive are putting themselves under a lot of pressure. And my, I guess I've actually said in one or two interviews, if you don't end up in this job or in this industry, nobody's going to die. You're a very smart person. You actually have a lot of options, and there are a lot of directions that things can go. And life is funny that way, because I get asked frequently, how can I, sort of follow in your path? How do I, break into this space, or how do I start an investment fund? And the answer is always such a disappointment to people, because it's like, well, wait for your friend to get a job over here and recruit you, like, because you're a good writer and you're the only one that wants to read legal documents. So everyone else just wants to go do deals, and I was the guy sitting and reading the legal. That's how I became an investment guy. I was the detail guy. And that served me very well. But ultimately, the last time I read a joint venture agreement was over a decade ago, probably. That's just not how it's evolved.
It's fascinating. Well, I think the other thing it's worth pointing out to students is that first job you took, you earn less.
Substantially. Yeah. Yeah, you do what you got to do sometimes. But to your point a minute ago, it's about just kind of keeping your eyes open for opportunity. I think younger people are more aware of this now, certainly, than I was coming out of UTV. But the sort of cliches about networking and everything. I'm fortunate, I'm the kind of person, I'm kind of interested in anything. I'm interested in whatever your business is, from laying pipe to biomedical or whatever. I'm just interested, and staying interested and curious is a good way for opportunities to come your way.
I think that's probably the perfect advice to end on.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. And I what I really appreciate about this, well, there's one thing I like about the pandemic, is that it makes it so much easier for us to do these things. I don't have to go downtown. You don't have to come to campus and deal with parking. But when our students are across the globe or across the country, they can access this. So that's a real silver lining for us.
Yes. There's a few upsides, but that is one of them.
Yeah. Well, when this is over, let's have lunch.
It's a date. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thank you so much.
Take care.